You're my mother's friend. We shouldn't do this.
Are you sure? I have 50 years of experience.
The Villa Santoro stood like a fortress against the twilight sky, its marble columns gleaming under strings of golden lights. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, each one worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Inside, Italy's elite mingled beneath crystal chandeliers, their laughter and conversation creating a symphony of wealth and power. The gala was meant to celebrate life, but tonight it bore the weight of death. Grandmother Lucia Marchetti had passed 3 days ago, and her family had decided to honor her memory with the kind of extravagance she had always appreciated. Isabella Marchetti stepped out of the black Mercedes, her stiletto heels clicking against the cobblestone. She wore a midnight blue gown that hugged her curves before flowing elegantly to the ground, her dark hair cascading in waves over her bare shoulders. At 23, she had inherited her father's sharp intelligence and her mother's striking beauty. Fresh off a flight from Boston, where she had completed her medical residency with top honors, she felt the familiar weight of home settling on her chest. Italy suffocated her sometimes with its expectations and traditions. Her mother, Viviana Marchetti, stood at the entrance greeting guests. Viviana was a woman who commanded respect without raising her voice, her posture perfect, her smile calculated. She had built an empire from the ashes of her husband's death, turning his shipping business into a multinational corporation. When she spotted Isabella, her expression softened slightly. "Bella, you're finally here." "Traffic," Isabella lied, though she had actually sat in the car for 20 minutes gathering courage. Viviana took her daughter's hands, studying her face. "You look exhausted. Come inside. Everyone is asking about you." Inside the villa, the air was thick with expensive perfume and whispered conversations. Isabella recognized faces from her childhood, business associates, politicians, and others whose occupations were never discussed in polite company. Her grandmother had known everyone who mattered in Italy, and they had all come to pay their respects. Isabella accepted condolences with practiced grace, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. She missed her grandmother desperately, the only person who had never tried to control her life. Across the room, Lorenzo Vitale watched her with the intensity of a predator studying prey. At 50, he was still a man who turned heads, his black hair streaked with distinguished gray, his tailored suit emphasizing broad shoulders that spoke of physical power. As the head of the Vitale family, one of Italy's oldest and most feared organizations, he had spent 3 decades building an empire through methods the law would never approve. But tonight, dressed in Armani and drinking aged whiskey, he looked like any other successful businessman. He had known Viviana for 20 years, their relationship built on mutual respect and carefully maintained boundaries. When Viviana needed things done quietly, Lorenzo made them happen. When Lorenzo needed legitimate business fronts, Viviana provided them. They were friends in the way powerful people could be friends, understanding that loyalty was valuable but never guaranteed. Lorenzo had seen Isabella grow from a defiant teenager into a beautiful woman, but he had never really looked at her until tonight. Something about the way she held herself, the sadness in her eyes mixed with barely contained anger, made it impossible to look away. He watched her escape to the balcony, her shoulders tight with tension, and found himself following before he could question the impulse. Later that evening, Isabella stood gripping the balcony railing, trying to breathe. The night air was cool against her flushed skin, but it did nothing to ease the pressure building in her chest. She felt like she was drowning in expectations, in her mother's plans for her future, in the memory of her grandmother's gentle hands and wise eyes. Tears threatened, but she refused to let them fall. Marchetti women did not cry in public. "Your mother is looking for you." Isabella turned to find Lorenzo leaning against the doorframe, his expression unreadable. She had always been slightly afraid of him, though she would never admit it. There was something dangerous about the way he moved, the way his dark eyes seemed to see through every carefully constructed wall. "Let her look," Isabella said, her voice sharper than intended. "She's good at that." Lorenzo's lips twitched, almost a smile. "You sound angry." "I'm not." She turned back to the city lights sprawling below. "I'm just tired of being told what to feel, what to think, who to be." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and decidedly masculine. "Viviana loves you. She wants to protect you." "By controlling every aspect of my life?" Isabella laughed bitterly. "I studied medicine because she decided it was respectable. I went to Boston because she chose the program. I'm here tonight playing the dutiful daughter while my grandmother is gone forever. And I never got to say goodbye because Mother thought I should finish my residency first." The words tumbled out. Years of resentment she had never dared voice. Lorenzo listened without interruption, his presence somehow making it easier to speak. When she finally fell silent, he reached out and gently turned her to face him. His hand on her arm sent an unexpected jolt through her system. "Lucia knew you loved her," he said quietly. "She told me so, 2 weeks before she passed." Isabella's eyes widened. "You saw her?" "I visit her every month. We played chess and argued about politics." His expression softened with memory. "She was proud of you, Bella. So incredibly proud." The tears she had been holding back finally spilled over. Before she could stop herself, she was crying against Lorenzo's chest, her carefully maintained composure shattering. He held her stiffly at first, clearly uncomfortable. Then gradually his arms came around her with surprising gentleness. They stood like that for several minutes, the sounds of the gala fading into background noise. Inside, Viviana found them on the balcony and made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, Isabella woke with swollen eyes and a pounding headache. Sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains of her childhood bedroom, which her mother had preserved exactly as she left it. Photographs of her medical school graduation lined the dresser, along with awards and certificates that represented years of relentless work. She stared at the ceiling, remembering how she had broken down in front of Lorenzo Vitale of all people. Embarrassment heated her cheeks. She barely knew the man, despite having seen him at family gatherings for years. He was her mother's associate, someone powerful and dangerous, who moved through their world like a shark through water. And she had cried all over his undoubtedly expensive suit. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother, requesting her presence at breakfast. Isabella dragged herself out of bed, showered, and dressed in simple black pants and a cream blouse. When she entered the dining room, Viviana was already seated, looking immaculate despite the late night. "Good morning, darling. How did you sleep?" "Fine," Isabella lied, pouring herself coffee. Viviana studied her daughter over the rim of her cup. "I saw you with Lorenzo last night." Isabella's hand froze. He was just being kind. "He's a good man, despite what people say about him." Viviana set down her cup with careful precision. "I've asked him to look after you while you're home." "What?" Isabella stared at her mother in disbelief. "I'm 23 years old. I don't need a babysitter." "You need protection. There are people who would use you to get to me, and you've been away long enough to forget how dangerous this world can be." "So you're assigning me a bodyguard? Without even asking?" Viviana's expression hardened. "I'm ensuring my daughter's safety. Lorenzo has agreed to keep an eye on you until we're certain there are no threats. End of discussion." Isabella wanted to scream. This was exactly what she had been talking about on the balcony, her mother making decisions, issuing commands, never considering that Isabella might have her own thoughts on the matter. But arguing with Viviana Marchetti was like arguing with a glacier, beautiful and cold, and utterly immovable. That afternoon, Isabella's anger had transformed into restless energy. She paced her room like a caged animal, resentment building with each passing minute. Her mother had gone to the office, leaving strict instructions that Isabella was to remain at the villa, as if she were a child who needed constant supervision. When her phone rang, and she saw her best friend Giada's name, she answered immediately. "Bella, you're back. We're going out tonight to celebrate. No arguments." Isabella glanced at the door, thinking of her mother's orders, of Lorenzo Vitale and his dark, watchful eyes. Then she thought of freedom, of one night where she could be herself instead of Viviana Marchetti's perfect daughter. "What time?" she asked. By evening, Isabella had formed a plan. She dressed in a red dress that her mother would definitely not approve of, applied makeup with a heavier hand than usual, and waited. The security team her mother employed rotated shifts at 8 o'clock. In the confusion of the change, she slipped out through the kitchen, her heels in her hand, her heart pounding with exhilaration. Giada was waiting 3 blocks away in her convertible, music already blasting. She had brought 2 other friends, Francesca and Martina, both of whom squealed when they saw Isabella. "Look at you," Giada laughed. "Boston turned you into an American rebel." "I've always been a rebel," Isabella said, sliding into the back seat. "I was just better at hiding it." They drove to Inferno, a club in the city center known for its exclusive guest list and wild parties. Isabella turned off her phone completely, ignoring the small voice in her head that said this was a terrible idea. She wanted to dance, to drink, to forget about death and duty and disappointed mothers. She wanted to feel alive. The club was already packed when they arrived, bodies moving to music that vibrated through the floor. Isabella let herself get swept into it, dancing with her friends, accepting drinks from strangers, laughing at jokes she would forget by morning. For a few hours, she was just another 23-year-old girl having fun. She didn't notice the man in the corner making a phone call, his eyes tracking her movements. Meanwhile, Lorenzo sat in his office reviewing shipping manifests when his phone rang. The number belonged to one of the men he had stationed near the Marchetti villa, insurance that Viviana's request would be fulfilled. "She's gone," the man reported. "Left through the kitchen about an hour ago. Got into a car with 3 women. We followed them to Inferno." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. He had agreed to watch over Isabella as a favor to Viviana, nothing more. But the thought of her in a club like Inferno, surrounded by men who would see her beauty and not the danger she represented, made something dark unfold in his chest. "I'm on my way," he said, already reaching for his jacket. His second in command, Marco, looked up from his own paperwork. "Problem?" The Marchetti girl decided to go dancing. Marco whistled low. "Viviana is going to lose her mind." "Only if she finds out." Lorenzo checked his gun out of habit, though he doubted he would need it. "Keep working on the shipping schedule. I'll be back." The drive to Inferno took 20 minutes. Lorenzo moved through the crowded streets with the ease of someone who owned half the city, which in many ways he did. Club owners knew better than to deny him entry. When he walked through Inferno's doors, the bouncer took one look at his face and stepped aside immediately. Inside, the music was deafening, the lights strobing in patterns designed to disorient. Lorenzo scanned the crowd with the practiced eye of a predator, finally spotting Isabella on the dance floor. She was laughing, her arms raised above her head, her body moving to the rhythm. She looked carefree and young, and so beautiful it almost hurt to look at her. Then he saw the man dancing behind her, his hands moving toward her waist. Lorenzo crossed the distance in seconds, his presence causing people to scatter without conscious thought. He placed one hand on the man's shoulder, and squeezed just hard enough to convey a message. The man turned, saw Lorenzo's face, and disappeared into the crowd without a word. Isabella spun around, her eyes unfocused from alcohol. When she recognized Lorenzo, her expression shifted from confusion to defiance. "What are you doing here?" "Taking you home." "I don't want to go home." She crossed her arms, swaying slightly. "I'm having fun." Lorenzo looked around the club, at the people pulling out phones to record the scene, at the potential for disaster that surrounded them. "Everyone out," he said, his voice cutting through the music. The DJ stopped the track. Security guards who worked for Lorenzo began clearing the club efficiently. Giada started to protest, but Francesca, who recognized Lorenzo, pulled her toward the exit. Within minutes, the club was empty except for Isabella and Lorenzo. She stared at him with a mixture of anger and something else, something that made his pulse quicken despite his better judgment. "I hate you," she said, her words slightly slurred. "I hate my mother. I hate this whole suffocating world." Someone had left a phone recording on the bar. Lorenzo walked over and smashed it against the tiles, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. When he turned back, Isabella had moved closer, her eyes locked on his face. "Why do you look more handsome?" She reached up to touch his jaw, her fingers trailing over his skin. "Your face is spinning." "No, now it's big." Lorenzo caught her wrist gently. "You're drunk." "So what?" She swayed forward, and he caught her waist to steady her. "You can't tell me what to do. Nobody can." "Isabella." "I feel like I'm going to—" Her eyes widened. Oh, God. She threw up on his suit, the expensive fabric ruined in seconds. Lorenzo's guards, watching from the doorway, waited for the explosion. Their boss did not tolerate disrespect, and vomiting on his €12,000 suit was definitely disrespectful. But Lorenzo simply lifted Isabella into his arms, carrying her toward the exit. "Clean this up," he told the guards, "and make sure nobody talks about tonight." "Yes, sir." Isabella mumbled against his chest, her words incoherent. Lorenzo placed her carefully in the back seat of his car and dismissed his driver. He wanted to handle this himself, though he could not explain why. She was Viviana's daughter, nothing more, a responsibility he had accepted out of friendship and business pragmatism. But as he drove through the empty streets, glancing at her in the rearview mirror, he knew he was lying to himself. There was something about Isabella Marchetti that had gotten under his skin, something that made him want to protect her and possess her in equal measure. It was dangerous and inappropriate and completely undeniable. At a red light, he turned to check on her and found her eyes open, watching him with an intensity that seemed at odds with her intoxicated state. "You came for me," she whispered. "Your mother asked me to look after you." "No." She shook her head slowly. "You came because you wanted to." The light turned green. Lorenzo forced himself to look away, to focus on the road. He had spent 50 years building control, learning to master every impulse and desire. But Isabella was testing that control in ways he had not anticipated. Back at the villa, he carried her to her room, navigating the familiar hallways in silence. Her guards had returned and reported her safe to Viviana, who was still at the office. Lorenzo had maybe an hour before she came home and discovered her daughter's condition. He laid Isabella on her bed, removing her heels with careful efficiency. She curled onto her side, watching him through half-closed eyes. "Stay," she murmured. "You need to sleep. Don't leave me alone." Her voice cracked slightly. "Everyone always leaves." Something in Lorenzo's chest tightened. He should go. He should walk out of this room and forget the way she looked at him, the way his name sounded in her voice. Instead, he pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down. "I'll stay until you sleep." Isabella reached out, her hand finding his. Her fingers were small and delicate against his scarred knuckles. Promise? Promise. She smiled, a real smile that transformed her face, and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into sleep. Lorenzo sat there in the darkness, her hand still in his, and tried to remember all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Sometime around 3 in the morning, Isabella stirred. She turned toward him, her eyes still closed, and in her sleep-addled state, she leaned forward. Her lips brushed against his, soft and hesitant, a question more than a statement. Every rational thought in Lorenzo's head screamed at him to pull away. She was 23. She was drunk. She was his friend's daughter. But his body had stopped listening to reason the moment she touched him. He kissed her back, his hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. The kiss deepened, heat building between them, years of discipline crumbling under the weight of sudden desperate need. Isabella made a small sound in the back of her throat, and it was enough to break through the haze. Lorenzo pulled back, his breathing ragged, and saw her eyes flutter open. For a moment, they stared at each other in the darkness. Then reality crashed down. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Sleep," he said, his voice rough. "We'll talk in the morning." He left the room before she could respond, before he could do something even more stupid. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall and tried to remember who he was. Lorenzo Vitale did not lose control. He did not kiss drunk girls who were young enough to be his daughter. He did not feel his heart racing like a teenager experiencing his first crush. But apparently, when it came to Isabella Marchetti, all his rules meant nothing. He spent the rest of the night in the chair outside her door, telling himself he was simply ensuring she did not need help. The truth, which he refused to examine too closely, was that he could not bring himself to leave. As dawn broke over the villa, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Lorenzo finally allowed himself to admit that he was in serious trouble. Isabella woke with a pounding headache and fragmented memories. She remembered the club, remembered Lorenzo arriving like an avenging angel. She remembered throwing up on him. God, how mortifying. But there was something else, something her mind shied away from, even as her lips tingled with phantom sensation. She stumbled to the bathroom, splashed cold water on her face, and tried to piece together the night. When she returned to the bedroom, she found Lorenzo sitting in a chair by the window, still wearing his ruined suit, looking like he had not slept at all. "You stayed," she said, surprised. "I said I would." Isabella wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware that her dress was inappropriate for morning conversation. "About last night. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have gone out, and I definitely shouldn't have." She trailed off, not quite ready to mention the vomit incident. "Your mother doesn't know." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you. But if you pull something like that again, I won't be able to protect you from her anger." Isabella bristled at his tone. "You're not my keeper, Lorenzo. My mother might think she can assign you to watch me like some guard dog, but I'm an adult. I make my own choices. Even stupid ones? Who are you to judge?" She stepped closer, anger replacing embarrassment. "You're not exactly a saint. I know what you do, what you really do. My mother thinks I'm naive, but I'm not blind." Lorenzo rose from the chair with predatory grace. "Then you should be smart enough to know that people in my world have enemies, and those enemies would love to get their hands on Viviana Marchetti's daughter. So, this is about protecting Mother's investment? This is about keeping you alive." They stood inches apart, tension crackling between them. Isabella's heart raced, and she could not tell if it was from anger or something far more dangerous. She became acutely aware of his size, the way he towered over her, the intensity in his dark eyes. "You won't tell my mother, will you?" she finally asked, her voice smaller than she intended. She'll go insane. Lorenzo's expression was unreadable. Should have thought of that sooner. You told her? Isabella's eyes widened in betrayal. Not yet. He moved past her toward the door. But you need to understand something, Isabella. Your actions have consequences. Last night proved that. Nothing happened last night except I had too much to drink and you played hero. He paused in the doorway, his back to her. Is that all you remember? The question hung in the air between them. Isabella felt heat flood her cheeks as fragmented images flickered through her mind. His face close to hers. The taste of whiskey. The feeling of falling and being caught. I would never, she started to say, but the words died on her lips because she did not know what she would never do anymore. Lorenzo glanced back at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Get some rest. I'll see you this evening. Why this evening? Your mother wants us to have dinner, the three of us. He smiled without humor. Try not to get into any trouble before then. He left, and Isabella sank onto her bed, her mind racing. The pieces of last night were slowly coming together, forming a picture she did not want to see. She had kissed Lorenzo Vitale. Or had he kissed her? Did it matter? He was 50 years old, her mother's associate, someone completely inappropriate in every possible way. And she could not stop thinking about the way his hand had felt against her face, gentle despite all his violence. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Isabella's room as she tried and failed to concentrate on the medical journal she had brought from Boston. The words blurred together, her mind replaying fragments of the previous night in torturous detail. She could still feel the ghost of Lorenzo's touch, the way his fingers had cradled her face with surprising tenderness. It made no sense. Men like him did not do tender. Her phone buzzed with a message from Giada asking if she was still alive. Isabella typed out a quick response, assuring her friend she was fine and apologizing for the abrupt end to their night. Then she scrolled through her contacts, stopping at her mother's name. Part of her wanted to call Viviana and confess everything, to face the consequences and be done with it. But the thought of disappointing her mother yet again made her stomach clench. A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. One of the household staff entered with a garment bag. From Signor Vitale, the woman said, laying it carefully across the chair. For this evening. Isabella stared at the bag long after the woman left. Slowly, she unzipped it to reveal a stunning dress in deep emerald green, the kind of garment that cost more than most people's monthly salary. A note was pinned to the hanger in bold, masculine handwriting, something appropriate for dinner. Wear it. The audacity of the man made her want to throw the dress out the window. Who did he think he was, buying her clothes like she was some doll he could dress up? But when she held the fabric against her skin, she had to admit it was beautiful. And it would fit perfectly, which meant he had been paying attention to more than just her safety. That thought sent an unwelcome flutter through her stomach. By 6 o'clock, Isabella had showered, styled her hair in loose waves, and applied makeup with a steady hand despite her nerves. The dress fit like it had been made for her, hugging her curves before flowing elegantly to just above her knees. She studied herself in the mirror, hardly recognizing the sophisticated woman staring back. This was not the rebellious girl who had snuck out last night. This was someone who belonged in Lorenzo Vitale's world. The realization terrified her. Downstairs, Viviana was already entertaining Lorenzo in the sitting room. Isabella heard their voices as she descended the grand staircase, her heels clicking against marble. When she entered the room, both conversations stopped. Her mother's eyes swept over her approvingly, but it was Lorenzo's reaction that made her breath catch. His expression remained carefully neutral, but something dark and hungry flashed in his eyes before he mastered it. "Bella, you look beautiful," Viviana said, rising to kiss her daughter's cheeks. That color suits you perfectly. Thank you. Isabella did not look at Lorenzo. I apologize for my absence today. I wasn't feeling well. Lorenzo mentioned you might have overdone it at the gala last night. Viviana's tone held a hint of reproach. I told you to pace yourself with the wine. So he had covered for her. Isabella finally met his gaze, finding amusement there, mixed with warning. You're right, Mother. I should have been more careful. Well, you're here now, shall we? Viviana gestured toward the dining room. Dinner was an exercise in carefully maintained pretense. Viviana dominated the conversation, discussing business matters and social obligations, while Isabella pushed food around her plate. Lorenzo participated with the ease of someone used to navigating complicated social situations, but Isabella felt his attention on her even when he was speaking to her mother. Every time she reached for her water glass, she was aware of his eyes tracking the movement. When she laughed at one of Viviana's stories, she saw his lips curve slightly, as if he enjoyed the sound. It was maddening and thrilling in equal measure. Isabella, are you listening? Viviana's sharp tone cut through her distraction. Sorry, what? I was saying that Lorenzo has agreed to show you around the city while you're home. You've been away so long, I thought it would be nice for you to reconnect with Milan. Isabella's fork clattered against her plate. That's not necessary. I can explore on my own. With proper security, of course. Viviana's expression brooked no argument. Lorenzo knows the city better than anyone. It's already arranged. Across the table, Lorenzo sipped his wine, his expression maddeningly calm. If Isabella would rather not, I'm sure we can make other arrangements. It was a trap, and Isabella knew it. If she refused, her mother would want to know why. If she agreed, she would be spending time alone with the man who had kissed her last night, the man she could not stop thinking about, despite every logical reason she should. Fine, she said, the word coming out sharper than intended. Thank you for your generosity. Something that might have been satisfaction flickered across Lorenzo's face. It's my pleasure. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. Isabella counted the minutes until she could excuse herself. But when Viviana's phone rang with an urgent business call, she had no choice but to remain in the sitting room with Lorenzo while her mother stepped out. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Isabella studied the pattern on the Persian rug, acutely aware of Lorenzo's presence across from her. He sat with the stillness of a predator, his posture relaxed, but somehow radiating controlled power. You didn't have to buy me a dress, she finally said. You needed something appropriate. I have plenty of appropriate clothes. None as beautiful as that one. The compliment, delivered in his low, measured tone, sent heat rushing to her cheeks. Isabella forced herself to meet his gaze. Is this how you operate? Buying things for women to get what you want? I don't need to buy anything to get what I want. His eyes held hers with unnerving intensity. And I certainly don't manipulate children. I'm not a child. Then stop acting like one. He leaned forward slightly. Last night was a mistake. We both know it. But sneaking around and throwing tantrums won't change what happened. Isabella stood abruptly, anger flaring hot in her chest. I wasn't throwing a tantrum. I was trying to have one night of freedom before my mother suffocates me completely, and you had no right to follow me. I had every right. Lorenzo rose as well, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. Your mother asked me to protect you. That's exactly what I was doing. From what? Dancing? Having fun? From making decisions you'd regret. His voice dropped lower. From men who would take advantage of your beauty and your name without caring about the consequences. Men like you? The words hung in the air between them. Lorenzo's jaw tightened, and for a moment Isabella thought he might actually lose his legendary control. Instead, he smiled, though the expression held no warmth. Men like me know better than to touch what doesn't belong to them. I don't belong to anyone. Keep telling yourself that. He stepped back, putting professional distance between them once more. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, wear comfortable shoes. And if I refuse, then I'll tell your mother about last night. All of it. Isabella's hands clenched into fists. You wouldn't. Try me. They stared at each other, wills locked in silent combat. Isabella wanted to hate him for his arrogance, his presumption, the way he seemed to see straight through every defense she had. But underneath the anger was something far more dangerous, a pull she could not explain or deny. Viviana's return broke the tension. I apologize for that. Crisis at the office. She looked between them, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Is everything all right? Perfect, Isabella said, her smile brittle. I was just thanking Lorenzo for his kindness. If you'll excuse me, I have some reading to do. She fled before either of them could respond, taking the stairs 2 at a time despite her heels. Safe in her room, she leaned against the closed door and tried to calm her racing heart. This was insane. She could not spend tomorrow alone with Lorenzo. Not when every word between them felt charged with electricity. Not when she kept remembering the taste of his kiss. But she also could not let him tell her mother about the club. Viviana would never forgive such defiance, and Isabella was not ready for that confrontation. So tomorrow she would go, would play the obedient daughter just one more time. And she would absolutely not think about the way Lorenzo looked at her, like she was something precious and dangerous all at once. The next morning arrived far too quickly. Isabella dressed in jeans and a simple white blouse, pulling her hair into a ponytail. If Lorenzo wanted to show her the city, she would make it clear this was not a date. She was only doing this to avoid her mother's wrath, nothing more. At exactly 10 o'clock, a black sports car pulled up to the villa. Lorenzo emerged wearing dark jeans and a fitted black shirt, looking far too attractive for someone his age. Isabella hated that she noticed, hated the way her pulse jumped when he smiled at her. Ready? He asked. Do I have a choice? There's always a choice, Isabella. You just don't like the consequences of yours. She slid into the passenger seat without responding. The car's interior smelled like leather, and his cologne, an intoxicating combination that made her far too aware of the small space they shared. Lorenzo drove with the same controlled precision he applied to everything else, navigating Milan's crowded streets with ease. Where are we going? Isabella asked, after several minutes of silence. You'll see. I hate surprises. You hate not being in control, he corrected. It's different. Isabella turned to study his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his reputation indicated. You think you know me? I'm beginning to. Based on what? One drunken night? And an awkward dinner? Lorenzo glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the road. Based on watching you grow up. Based on the way you argue with your mother even when you know you won't win. Based on the fact that you chose medicine because it was the one thing you could excel at that might actually make her proud. The accuracy of his observation stole her breath. You don't know anything about my relationship with my mother. I know Viviana loves you more than anything in this world, and I know you love her too, even when you're angry at her for trying to control your life. She doesn't try, she succeeds. Only because you let her. He turned onto a quieter street, the buildings growing older and more charming. You're 23, Isabella. You have money your father left you. If you really wanted freedom, you'd take it. It's not that simple. It never is. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. They drove in silence for a while, Isabella processing his words. Part of her wanted to argue, to defend her choices and her mother's intentions. But another part, the part that had snuck out to a club and kissed a dangerous man, recognized the truth in what he said. Lorenzo pulled up outside a small cafe in a neighborhood Isabella barely remembered. The streets here were narrow and cobblestoned, lined with shops that had existed for generations. He came around to open her door, offering his hand to help her out. She hesitated before taking it, telling herself the contact meant nothing, even as warmth spread from where their skin touched. "My grandmother used to bring me here when I was young," Lorenzo said, gesturing to the cafe. "Best espresso in Milan." Inside, the cafe was cozy and worn, filled with the rich aroma of coffee and fresh pastries. An elderly woman behind the counter looked up and broke into a wide smile when she saw Lorenzo. "Lorenzo, it's been too long." She came around the counter to embrace him, then turned curious eyes on Isabella. "And who is this beautiful young woman?" "A friend's daughter. Isabella, this is Sophia. She's been running this place for 40 years. 50, Sophia corrected with a laugh. "And you're still a terrible liar. Come, sit. I'll bring you the usual." They settled at a small table by the window. Isabella watched Lorenzo interact with Sophia, seeing a side of him she had not expected. He was warm here, almost playful, teasing the older woman about her cooking, while she swatted at him affectionately. It was so different from the cold, controlled man everyone feared. "You're staring," Lorenzo said when Sophia had returned to the counter. "I'm trying to figure you out." "And what have you concluded?" "That you're more complicated than you want people to believe." Sophia returned with 2 espressos and a plate of pastries, winking at Isabella, before retreating once more. Lorenzo sipped his coffee, studying Isabella over the rim of his cup. "Your grandmother used to say the same thing. You really visited her often?" "Every month for the last 10 years. We'd play chess and talk about everything except business. She was one of the few people who saw me as more than my reputation." Isabella felt something soften in her chest. She never mentioned it. "I asked her not to. Your mother and I have a professional relationship. Lucia and I had something different, something that didn't need to be complicated by external factors." "You mean you were friends?" "I suppose we were." He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look years younger. "She told me stories about you, about the time you tried to perform surgery on your teddy bear and gave it 40 stitches. About your first day of medical school when you called her crying because you thought you'd made a mistake." Isabella's eyes widened. "She told you that?" "She told me everything. She was proud of you, Isabella. Prouder than you know. And she worried about you constantly." "Why?" Isabella's voice came out smaller than intended. "Because she knew what it was like to live under Viviana's shadow. She knew how hard your mother pushes, and she worried you'd lose yourself trying to meet impossible standards." Tears pricked at Isabella's eyes. She blinked them back, not wanting to cry in front of him again. "I miss her so much." Lorenzo reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The gesture was simple, comforting, and it broke something loose inside her. A tear escaped, then another, and suddenly she was crying in earnest. He moved his chair closer, offering his handkerchief without a word. When she finally composed herself, Isabella felt hollowed out and somehow lighter. "I'm sorry. I keep falling apart on you. Grief doesn't follow a schedule." They sat in comfortable silence, finishing their coffee while morning sunlight streamed through the windows. Isabella found herself studying Lorenzo again, seeing him differently now. He was still dangerous, still inappropriate, still completely wrong for her in every rational way. But he was also the only person who seemed to understand the complicated tangle of love and resentment she felt toward her mother. Later, they walked through the neighborhood, Lorenzo pointing out landmarks, and sharing stories about his childhood. Isabella learned he had grown up poor, that he had clawed his way to power through intelligence and ruthlessness in equal measure. She learned his mother had died when he was 12, and his father had drunk himself to death 3 years later. "Is that when you joined the organization?" she asked, as they paused outside an old church. "Joined" makes it sound voluntary. Lorenzo's expression darkened. "I did what I had to do to survive. The rest followed." "Do you regret it?" He considered the question seriously. "I regret many things, but I can't regret the path that led me here, to this moment, showing you my city." The weight of his words settled over her. Isabella knew she should step back, should maintain professional distance, should remember all the reasons this connection between them was dangerous. Instead, she found herself moving closer. "Lorenzo, don't." He caught her hand, his grip gentle but firm. "Don't say whatever you're about to say. Not here. Not now." "Why not?" "Because I'm trying very hard to be a gentleman, and you're making it extremely difficult." Heat flooded through Isabella at the rough honesty in his voice. She knew she should listen to him, should walk away while she still could. But something reckless inside her wanted to push, to see what would happen if she stopped being careful. "What if I don't want you to be a gentleman?" Lorenzo's eyes darkened. His thumb traced circles on her palm, a touch that should have been innocent, but felt intimate beyond reason. "You don't know what you're asking for." "Then tell me." For a long moment, they stood there on the cobblestone street, the world narrowing to just the two of them. Isabella could see the war playing out across Lorenzo's face, desire battling discipline. Finally, he took a deliberate step back. "You're young and grieving and looking for something to make you feel alive again. I won't take advantage of that. You think this is about grief? I think you're confused about what you want. And I think your mother would kill us both if she knew we were having this conversation." The mention of Viviana was like cold water. Isabella pulled her hand free, embarrassment replacing boldness. "You're right. I don't know what I was thinking. Isabella, can we go back now? I'm tired." The drive back to the villa was silent and tense. Isabella stared out the window, berating herself for her stupidity. What had she expected? That Lorenzo would confess feelings for her, sweep her into his arms like some romantic fantasy. He was 50 years old, a powerful criminal, and her mother's business associate. The fact that he was being responsible should have made her grateful, not disappointed. When they pulled up to the villa, Isabella hurried out before Lorenzo could come around to her door, but he caught her arm gently, stopping her. "For what it's worth, you weren't wrong." She turned, confused. "About what?" "About me wanting to be here with you. About this not just being a favor to your mother." His dark eyes held hers with devastating honesty. "But that doesn't change what's right." Before Isabella could respond, he released her and drove away, leaving her standing in the driveway, with her heart pounding and her world tilted on its axis. The next few days passed in a blur of avoiding both her mother and Lorenzo. Isabella threw herself into studying, reviewing medical journals, and catching up with colleagues from Boston. But at night, lying in her childhood bed, she could not stop replaying their conversation. The way Lorenzo had looked at her, the rough honesty in his voice when he admitted wanting her. It was madness. She knew it was madness. But knowledge did nothing to quell the feelings building inside her. On the 4th day, Viviana announced they were hosting a dinner party for several business associates. Isabella tried to beg off, claiming exhaustion, but her mother would not hear of it. "You're a Marchetti," Viviana said firmly. "We have responsibilities to our position. Besides, Lorenzo specifically asked if you'd be attending." Isabella's pulse jumped. Why would he care? Because he's trying to be kind to my grieving daughter. Viviana studied Isabella's face. You've been avoiding him since your outing. Did something happen? No, Isabella lied. I've just been tired. The trip from Boston, the funeral, everything catching up with me. Viviana's expression softened. I know this has been difficult, but isolating yourself won't help. Please come to dinner. It would mean a lot to me. So, Isabella found herself once again dressing for an evening with Lorenzo Vitale. She chose a simple black dress, elegant but understated, and pinned her hair up in a classic style. When she descended the stairs, the house was already filled with guests, their voices carrying through the halls. She spotted Lorenzo immediately. He stood near the fireplace, commanding attention without seeming to try. He wore another perfectly tailored suit, this one charcoal gray, and he was deep in conversation with two men Isabella recognized as politicians. But when she entered the room, his gaze found hers unerringly. The night proceeded with painful slowness. Isabella made polite conversation with guests, smiled until her face hurt, and tried not to notice Lorenzo watching her. But she felt his attention like a physical touch, following her around the room, no matter how much distance she put between them. During dinner, she was seated between a banker and a lawyer, both of whom seemed determined to impress her with their accomplishments. She nodded and smiled in the appropriate places, while her mind wandered to the man seated at her mother's right hand, close enough to see but impossibly far away. After dinner, guests moved to the terrace for drinks and cigars. Isabella seized the opportunity to escape, slipping through the garden toward the greenhouse, where her grandmother had kept orchids. The glass structure was dark and peaceful, filled with the earthy scent of soil and flowers. She was examining a particularly beautiful bloom when she heard footsteps behind her. You disappeared. Isabella didn't turn. She had known somehow that Lorenzo would follow. I needed air. Your mother is looking for you. Let her look. Isabella touched the orchid's delicate petals. My grandmother loved these. She said they were temperamental and difficult, but worth the effort. Lorenzo moved closer, his presence warming the small space. She was talking about more than flowers. I know. Isabella finally turned to face him. She was talking about me. They stood inches apart in the dim greenhouse, the party's sounds muted by distance and glass. Isabella's heart raced as Lorenzo's eyes searched her face, looking for something she wasn't sure she could give. I can't stop thinking about you, she whispered, the confession torn from her despite her better judgment. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Isabella, I know I shouldn't. I know this is wrong in every possible way, but I can't make it stop. You're 23 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. You don't want to waste it on someone like me. You don't get to decide what I want. Someone has to. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with aching gentleness. Because you're not thinking clearly. You're grief-stricken and lonely and looking for an escape. Is that what you tell yourself? Isabella leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. That this is just me being emotional? Because I think you're scared. Of course I'm scared. The admission came out raw. I'm 50 years old, Isabella. I've done things that would horrify you. I've hurt people, killed people, built an empire on blood and violence. And you, his other hand came up to frame her face. You're light and life and everything good I've never deserved. Tears spilled down Isabella's cheeks. Then why does it feel like you're the only person who truly sees me? Lorenzo's control finally shattered. He pulled her against him, his lips finding hers with desperate hunger. The kiss was nothing like the brief, uncertain touch from that first night. This was raw and consuming, years of discipline burning away in the heat of mutual want. Isabella responded with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his jacket, pulling him closer, silently begging for more. His hands tangled in her hair, ruining the careful updo, and she didn't care. All that mattered was his mouth on hers, his body pressed against her, the way he made her feel alive and terrified and completely reckless. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, reality crashed back in. They stared at each other in the greenhouse's shadows, the enormity of what they had done settling over them like a shroud. "We can't do this," Lorenzo said, though his hands remained gentle on her face. "I know. Your mother would never forgive either of us. I know. This is impossible. I know." He kissed her again, softer this time, almost tender. Then he forced himself to step back. "Go back to the party. I'll follow in a few minutes." Isabella nodded numbly, her lips still tingling, her heart in pieces. She turned toward the greenhouse door, then paused. "Lorenzo." "Yes?" "I don't regret it. Any of it." Before he could respond, she fled into the night, leaving him alone among the orchids with the taste of her still on his lips. Isabella barely slept that night. She lay in bed replaying the kiss, the way Lorenzo's hands had felt in her hair. The desperate hunger in his voice when he said she was everything good he'd never deserved. Her fingers traced her lips, still swollen from his kisses, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was in love with him. It was insane and impossible, and completely real. The next morning, Viviana summoned her to breakfast with unusual formality. Isabella's stomach dropped when she entered the dining room and found her mother's expression cold and closed off. "Sit down, Isabella." She obeyed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Had someone seen them in the greenhouse? Had her mother somehow discovered everything? "I've made a decision about your future," Viviana said without preamble. "I've arranged a position for you at the hospital where I sit on the board. You'll start in 2 weeks, working in their cardiac unit. It's an excellent opportunity." Relief that this wasn't about Lorenzo warred with frustration at yet another decision made without her input. "Mother, I haven't even decided if I'm staying in Milan." "Of course you're staying. Your home is here, with your family." "My home is wherever I choose to make it." Viviana's eyes flashed with anger. "Don't be childish. I've invested too much in your education and your future to watch you throw it away on some misguided quest for independence. It's my life. It's a life I've protected and nurtured for 23 years. I won't apologize for wanting what's best for you." They were still arguing when Lorenzo arrived unannounced. He stood in the doorway of the dining room, his expression carefully neutral, though Isabella saw the tension in his shoulders. "Forgive the interruption," he said. "Viviana, we need to discuss the shipping issue we talked about yesterday." Viviana stood, clearly grateful for the distraction. "Of course, Isabella. We'll continue this conversation later. Don't leave the house." The command was pointed. Isabella watched her mother leave with Lorenzo, catching his brief glance in her direction. The concern in his eyes made her chest ache, but Isabella was done being obedient. She waited exactly 10 minutes before slipping out through the kitchen again, this time heading to Giada's apartment across the city. Her friend opened the door in pajamas, surprised but delighted. "Bella, what are you doing here?" "I needed to escape." Isabella collapsed on Giada's couch. "My mother is suffocating me, and I think I'm losing my mind." Giada made coffee while Isabella poured out everything. The arranged job, the constant control, though she carefully left out any mention of Lorenzo. Some secrets were too dangerous to share. They spent the afternoon watching movies and eating ice cream like they used to in university. For a few hours, Isabella felt normal again, just a 23-year-old girl with her best friend. But around 5 o'clock, her phone began buzzing incessantly. Her mother, the security team, and finally, Lorenzo. She let his call go to voicemail 3 times before Giada raised an eyebrow. You going to answer that? It's just my mother's associate checking up on me. Must be some associate to call 4 times. Isabella's phone buzzed again. This time, the text read, "Answer the phone, or I'm coming to get you. Your choice." With a sigh, she stepped onto Giada's balcony and called him back. "I'm fine. You can tell my mother I'm with a friend." "I know where you are." Lorenzo's voice was tight with restrained anger. "I also know you gave your security team the slip again. This is becoming a pattern, Isabella. Maybe if everyone stopped treating me like a prisoner, I wouldn't need to escape. You don't understand the danger you're in." "What danger?" "This is Milan, not a war zone. I'm having coffee with my best friend, not running guns or whatever it is you do." Silence stretched between them. When Lorenzo spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost pained. "There are people who would hurt you to get to your mother, to get to me. Every time you disappear, every moment I don't know where you are, He stopped, seeming to catch himself. Isabella's anger deflated. "Lorenzo, stay where you are. I'm sending a car. I can get home myself." "Isabella, please." The word came out rough, almost desperate. "Just this once, let me know you're safe." She closed her eyes, feeling the pull of him even across the phone line. "Fine, but I'm not going straight home. I need more time. Where do you want to go?" The question hung loaded with possibility. Isabella knew what she should say, knew she should ask him to take her to the villa where her mother waited. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "Somewhere we can talk. Just the 2 of us." Another pause, longer this time. Then Lorenzo said, "There's a place I know. The car will be there in 20 minutes. Isabella returned inside to find Giada watching her with knowing eyes. "That didn't sound like just your mother's associate. It's complicated. It always is with men like that." Giada hugged her tight. "Just be careful, okay? Men with that much power, they're used to getting what they want." "What if I want him too?" Giada pulled back, studying her face. "Then God help you both." The car arrived exactly 20 minutes later. The driver took Isabella across the city to a building she didn't recognize, older and elegant, overlooking the Navigli district. Lorenzo was waiting in the lobby, and the sight of him made her breath catch. He looked tired, lines of stress visible around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "This is my private apartment," he said, as they rode the elevator to the top floor. "No one knows about it except my most trusted people." "Why are you bringing me here?" "Because it's the only place in this city where we can have an honest conversation without your mother's security team reporting back to her." The apartment was surprisingly warm, filled with books and art that spoke of actual personal taste, rather than hired decorators. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered stunning views of the canals below. Isabella walked to the glass, trying to process the intimacy of being in Lorenzo's private space. "I can't do this anymore," she said, without turning around. "This dance we're doing, pretending there's nothing between us. It's driving me crazy." She heard him move closer. "What do you want me to say, Isabella? That I think about you constantly? That I can't sleep because I'm imagining all the ways this could destroy everything I've built? That I'm terrified of what your mother would do if she found out? I want you to tell me the truth." She finally turned to face him. "Do you feel this too? Or am I alone in it?" Lorenzo closed the remaining distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face with heartbreaking gentleness. "I've felt it since the night of the gala, when I saw you standing on that balcony looking like you carried the weight of the world. I told myself it was nothing, that it would pass. But every moment I spend with you makes it worse. Then why are we fighting it? Because I'm supposed to protect you, not ruin you. Because you deserve someone your own age, someone without blood on his hands. Because if I give in to this, I won't be able to let you go. Isabella's hands came up to cover his. What if I don't want you to let go? The kiss that followed was inevitable. A collision of want and need, and everything they had been denying. Lorenzo pulled her against him, like she was oxygen, and he was drowning, and Isabella responded with equal desperation. They stumbled backward until her spine hit the window. The city spread out behind her like a glittering promise. His hands moved to her waist, her hips, sliding up her ribs with possessive heat. Isabella tugged at his shirt, needing to feel his skin, needing to erase every barrier between them. They broke apart only long enough to shed unnecessary clothing. Their eyes locked, the enormity of what they were doing written clearly on both their faces. If we do this, everything changes, Lorenzo said, his voice rough with desire and warning. I know. Your mother will never forgive me. I don't care. Isabella. He rested his forehead against hers, breathing hard. I'm trying to do the right thing. The right thing is being with me. She kissed him softly, then with growing passion. Please, Lorenzo. I need you. His control shattered. He lifted her easily, carrying her to the bedroom, laying her down, with a gentleness that contrasted beautifully with the hunger in his eyes. What followed was tender and consuming, a claiming that went far beyond the physical. Lorenzo worshipped her body like she was something sacred, and Isabella gave herself completely, holding nothing back. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the dim bedroom, Lorenzo's fingers tracing lazy patterns on her skin. Isabella had never felt so complete, so perfectly where she belonged. But as reality began seeping back in, fear crept in with it. What happens now? She whispered. Lorenzo pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. Now, we figure out how to tell your mother without her killing me. She'll be furious. She'll be devastated. She trusted me to protect you, and instead... He didn't finish the sentence. Isabella propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face. Do you regret it? I regret that it will hurt Viviana. I regret the complications this will cause. But you... His hand came up to cup her cheek. I could never regret you. They stayed in Lorenzo's apartment through the night, talking and making love, and planning a future that seemed impossible but necessary. As dawn broke over Milan, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Isabella knew there was no going back. She had chosen Lorenzo, chosen love over duty, and whatever consequences came would be worth it. But when they finally returned to the villa the following morning, they found Viviana waiting in the foyer, her expression colder than Isabella had ever seen it. Where have you been? Isabella lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. With Lorenzo. I can see that. Viviana's eyes moved between them, taking in their rumpled clothing, the way they stood close together. Understanding dawned, followed by betrayal so sharp it was almost physical. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you didn't. Mother, how could you? Viviana's voice shook with rage and hurt. Both of you. I trusted you, Lorenzo. I asked you to protect her, and you seduced her instead? It wasn't like that, Lorenzo said, his voice calm despite the tension radiating through him. Viviana, please, let us explain. Explain what? That my daughter and my oldest friend betrayed my trust. That the man I've worked with for 20 years took advantage of a grieving girl young enough to be his daughter? I love her. The words fell into stunned silence. Isabella's heart stopped, then started racing. Lorenzo had never said it before, not even in the privacy of his apartment. But here, facing Viviana's fury, he said it without hesitation. You love her, Viviana repeated, her laugh bitter. How convenient. And what happens when you get bored? When someone younger and prettier comes along? What happens to my daughter then? That will never happen. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. Lorenzo stepped forward, his presence commanding even in the face of Viviana's anger. I've spent 50 years building power, accumulating wealth, doing whatever necessary to survive in this world. But none of it meant anything until I met your daughter. She makes me want to be better, to deserve the way she looks at me. So yes, I can promise that I will love her for the rest of my life, because I've never been more certain of anything. Viviana stared at him, something flickering in her eyes that might have been understanding before her expression hardened again. And you? She turned to Isabella. You're willing to throw away everything for him? Your career, your reputation, your future? He is my future, Isabella said quietly. I know you don't understand, and I know this hurts you. But I love him, Mother. Not because I'm grieving or confused or looking for escape. I love him because he sees me, really sees me, in a way no one else ever has. You're 23 years old. You don't know what love is. Maybe not. But I know what it feels like to finally breathe, to finally feel like I have a choice in my own life. And I choose him. Viviana looked between them, her carefully constructed composure cracking. If you do this, if you pursue this relationship, there will be consequences. People will talk. Your reputation will suffer. And her voice broke. I don't know if I can watch you make this mistake. Then don't watch, Isabella said, tears streaming down her face. But please, don't ask me to give him up. I can't. The standoff lasted several heartbeats. Then Viviana turned and walked away, her spine rigid, leaving Isabella and Lorenzo standing in the foyer with the wreckage of her trust scattered around them. The following weeks were the hardest of Isabella's life. Viviana refused to speak to either of them, communicating only through her assistant when necessary. The arranged hospital position disappeared. Friends and family members took sides, some supporting Isabella's choice, others condemning it. The gossip magazines had a field day when news leaked about the relationship, painting Lorenzo as a cradle robber and Isabella as a naive girl throwing her life away. But through it all, Lorenzo remained steady. He handled the media with ruthless efficiency, ensuring the worst stories never made it to print. He stood beside Isabella at every social function, his hand at her back, silently declaring his claim for all the world to see. And at night, in the privacy of his apartment where they now lived together, he held her while she cried for the mother who wouldn't speak to her. 2 months after their relationship became public, Lorenzo received a call that changed everything. One of his rivals, a man named Dante Russo, who had been trying to expand into Lorenzo's territory for years, had decided to strike where Lorenzo was most vulnerable. Isabella was leaving a medical conference when 2 men grabbed her off the street, forcing her into a waiting van. She fought, screaming and clawing, but they were stronger. The last thing she saw before a cloth covered her face was the concerned expression of a passerby pulling out their phone. When Lorenzo got the call, he was in a meeting with his top lieutenants. Marco watched his boss's face turn to stone, all emotion draining away to reveal the cold, calculating killer underneath. "Find her," Lorenzo said, his voice deadly calm. "Mobilize everyone. Check every warehouse, every safe house, every property Russo owns or has ties to. And when we find him, I want him alive. I need him to understand what happens when someone touches what's mine." The organization moved with terrifying efficiency. Within hours, they had traced the van to an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city. Lorenzo led the assault personally, his gun drawn, his face a mask of controlled fury. They cut through Russo's guards like they were nothing, leaving bodies in their wake. Isabella was in the basement, tied to a chair, but unharmed. When the door burst open and she saw Lorenzo, relief crashed through her so powerfully she nearly fainted. He crossed the room in 3 strides, cutting her bonds with hands that shook slightly, despite his otherwise calm demeanor. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "I'm fine. Scared, but fine." Lorenzo pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She felt him trembling, felt the raw emotion he was fighting to contain. "I thought I'd lost you. When I got that call, I thought, I'm okay. You found me." Behind them, Marco appeared with Dante Russo in custody. The man was bloodied but conscious, his eyes wide with fear when he saw Lorenzo's expression. "Please," Dante begged. "I didn't know she meant that much to you. It was just business." Lorenzo released Isabella gently, turning to face the man who had dared threaten what he loved. "Business." He repeated the word softly. "You kidnapped the woman I love and called it business. Lorenzo, please, we can make a deal. The only deal you're getting is a choice in how you die." Lorenzo pulled his gun, the movement casual and terrifying. "Quick or slow? Choose." "Wait." Isabella's voice cut through the tension. She moved to Lorenzo's side, her hand on his arm. "Don't do this. Not like this. He took you. He could have killed you. But he didn't. And if you kill him now, you'll have to live with that. We'll have to live with that." Lorenzo looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression softened. He lowered the gun slightly. "He deserves to die for what he did." "Maybe. But you deserve to be better than this. We both do." The warehouse fell silent except for Dante's ragged breathing. Finally, Lorenzo holstered his weapon. "Get him out of my sight. Let the police find him tied up with evidence of every crime he's committed in the last decade. I want him in prison for the rest of his life, thinking every day about the mercy I showed him because of her." Marco nodded and dragged Dante away. Lorenzo turned back to Isabella, his hands framing her face with desperate gentleness. "You shouldn't have stopped me. He deserved worse than prison." "I know. But I need you to be the man who chooses mercy. The man who can be both powerful and good. That's the man I fell in love with." Lorenzo kissed her, soft and reverent, his thumb wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I love you. More than power. More than revenge. More than anything in this world. Then prove it. Let's build something better together." The kidnapping had one unexpected consequence. It brought Viviana back. She appeared at Lorenzo's apartment 2 days later, her expression still guarded, but no longer hostile. Isabella answered the door, shocked to see her mother standing there. "May I come in?" They sat in the living room, the silence awkward, until Viviana finally spoke. "I saw the news. About what happened. About what Lorenzo did to get you back. He saved me. He also showed restraint because you asked him to. That—" Viviana paused, choosing her words carefully. "That tells me something about both of you, about how you are together." Isabella's heart raced with hope. "Mother, I'm not saying I approve. I'm not saying this doesn't terrify me. But I've spent the last 2 months thinking about what you said, about choosing your own life. And I realized I've been so focused on protecting you that I never taught you how to protect yourself, how to make your own choices and live with the consequences. I love him, Mother. I know it's complicated and difficult, but I love him." Viviana's eyes filled with tears. "I know, baby. I can see it. And more importantly, I can see how he loves you, the way he looks at you, like you're the most precious thing in his world. I've known Lorenzo for 20 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. So you'll give us your blessing? I'll try to accept it. That's all I can promise right now." It was enough. Isabella crossed the room and hugged her mother tightly, feeling years of tension finally begin to ease. 6 months later, Isabella stood in her grandmother's garden, wearing a simple white dress, while Lorenzo waited at an altar of roses. The wedding was small, just family and close friends, including Viviana, who had slowly come to accept their relationship. As Isabella walked down the aisle, she caught her mother's eye and saw tears, but also a small, genuine smile. Lorenzo took her hands, his own trembling slightly. The priest spoke words about love and commitment, but Isabella barely heard them. All she could focus on was Lorenzo's face, the way he looked at her, like she was his entire world. "I have 50 years of experience in many things," Lorenzo said during his vows, his voice carrying to the small crowd. "But nothing prepared me for loving you. You walked into my life and changed everything. You made me want to be better, to deserve the gift of your love. I promise to protect you, to cherish you, to stand by your side through whatever comes. You are my light, Isabella, my redemption, my everything." Isabella's own vows were simpler. You see me, the real me, not the daughter my mother wants me to be, or the doctor everyone expects. Just me. And somehow, impossibly, you love all of it. I choose you, Lorenzo. Today, and every day for the rest of our lives. They sealed their promises with a kiss, while their guests applauded. Viviana wiped her eyes, Marco grinned, and somewhere, Isabella felt certain her grandmother was smiling down at them. 2 years later, Isabella stood in the same garden cradling their daughter, Lucia, named for the grandmother, who had brought them together in ways she never could have anticipated. Lorenzo sat beside her on the bench, his finger caught in their daughter's tiny grip, his expression one of wonder. "She has your eyes," Isabella said softly. "And your stubbornness. I can already tell." Isabella laughed, leaning into his side. The path they had chosen had not been easy. There were still people who whispered about the age difference, still family members who struggled to understand. But they had built something beautiful together, a life filled with love and purpose. Lorenzo pressed a kiss to her temple, then to Lucia's forehead. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For being brave enough to choose this, to choose us, for making me believe I could deserve happiness." Isabella tilted her face up for a proper kiss, gentle and sweet. "We chose each other, and I would do it again, every single time." As the sun set over the garden, painting the sky in brilliant colors, the Vitale family sat together in perfect peace. The Mafia boss and the doctor's daughter, the impossible love that had conquered every obstacle. And in Lucia's innocent eyes, the promise of a future built on love stronger than fear, on hope stronger than doubt. Their story had begun with grief and ended with joy, and it was only just beginning.